confronted my brother after months of silence. SIL blocked me. They move into my parents' house after a family drama. Shocking. My brother, 25 years old, and sister-in-law, 24 years old, are currently anticipating the arrival of a baby, which is due any day. Lately, they have started to give my parents the silent treatment, and I am at a loss regarding what to do, especially since I live in a different state from them. Apologies for the lengthy explanation. Tensions have existed between my brother, sister-in-law, and my parents throughout their entire marriage. The issues began due to a conflict that arose while I was in college, prior to their marriage. For context, my brother proposed to his high school girlfriend, now wife, when he was 21. She had been planning her wedding on Pinterest for years, similar to many of us, but had no intention of hosting a large bachelorette party, primarily because she was not much of a drinker. Instead, she planned to have her bachelorette celebration at Halloween Horror Nights, inviting her high school friends, her cousin, and her sister-in-law. I was also invited, and since I attended college nearby, I confirmed my attendance despite my busy class schedule. She provided me with a specific time, and I bought a ticket. A few weeks later, I arrived at the amusement park an hour early, ahead of the time she had specified, so that I would not be late. I spent some time at Starbucks people watching until around 5:00 p.m., which was the agreed meeting time. After not receiving any text messages, I decided to reach out and inquire about their arrival. My soon-to-be sister-in-law planned to carpool with friends from our hometown, so I presumed they were held up in traffic. I waited for a response, but none came. Another 30 minutes passed, and I texted again, finally receiving a message indicating they were on their way. It turned out that she had scheduled a hair trial for her wedding on the same day as the event, which is why she was running late. Faced with the situation, I opted to grab some food since the event wouldn't start until 6:00 p.m. After waiting for nearly an hour and expecting them to have arrived, I messaged my sister-in-law again for an update. She replied that they had made it but were hungry and had ordered pizza to the hotel. Another 30 minutes passed, making it nearly 8:00 p.m. by this point. I still hadn't heard anything, so I decided to enter the park to experience some scare zones, though I refrained from entering any haunted houses because the express pass was limited to one use per house. I sat alone in the park, and not having heard from my sister-in-law, I texted my brother to see if he knew her whereabouts and informed my parents about the situation. This turned out to be a big mistake. My father called my brother in a panic, questioning how his future wife could show such a lack of empathy and not communicate her location. He was furious that I had been left alone in the park during such a significant event where anything could have happened, even though I was a college student at that time. Shortly after, my brother called me and apologized, asking where I was and suggesting I enjoy my time by myself. While this was happening, my brother was also messaging my sister-in-law, trying to find out her location. He informed me that she was on her way, and that was the end of it. I waited on the curb, and they finally appeared a little after 9:00 p.m., 4 hours later than expected. My sister-in-law looked completely indifferent to the situation, and they all dismissed the ordeal, urging me to join them for our first haunted house visit. The remainder of the evening went smoothly. I exchanged pleasantries with her friends, though we had little in common. I remained polite and did not mention their significant tardiness. At the end of the night, I chose to leave early as I had class the following morning and bid them farewell. They seemed somewhat relieved by my departure, but I chose not to dwell on it. Fast forward, my sister-in-law harbored resentment over that night. My brother had apparently received a reprimand from our father, who suggested that his wife should have been more considerate regarding other people's time. My father expressed his discontent about her leaving his daughter unattended and failing to communicate her plans. He remarked, "You should reconsider marrying someone like that." My father said this in a moment of anger towards my sister-in-law, expressing his protective instincts for me. Unfortunately, my brother shared everything with my future sister-in-law, particularly that line. She was infuriated with both me and my father. To ease the situation, my mother went out to lunch with them, only for my sister-in-law to maintain that it was not her fault, asserting she had communicated adequately and that I should apologize. I chose to let it go, recognizing that I was not at fault for her tardiness and her decision to leave me. I endeavored to take the high road and indeed offered her an apology, while clarifying that I did not feel I was in the wrong. I only contacted my brother and parents out of concern for how to navigate the situation. I acted with no malice or intent to ruin her bachelorette party, as she had accused. This incident led to the first instance of mistreatment directed towards me by both her and my brother. According to her, the fault lay with me and my parents for ruining her bachelorette party and provoking drama. When it came time for the wedding, we were largely excluded from planning and information, despite my parents covering most of the costs. My sister-in-law shared what my father had said with her entire family, manipulating his words to portray us as though we despised her and sought to sabotage their engagement. At the wedding rehearsal, the atmosphere was filled with awkward silence, and her family clearly harbored anger toward us due to their preconceived notions. Although we had met them previously, the sudden change in attitude was alarming and uncomfortable. During the wedding itself, her family took center stage throughout the proceedings, delivering speeches, while my parents and I remained in the background with our side of the family. I didn't even get the chance to dance with my brother or have any meaningful conversation, which is something that often happens at weddings. My parents ultimately financed my brother and sister-in-law's entire honeymoon at an all-inclusive resort as a wedding gift. They had a splendid time, but offered little feedback afterward. Following their honeymoon, they moved into an apartment and adopted a dog. My brother asked both my mother and me to clear out his childhood room, transporting all his belongings to his new apartment. We assisted him, having spent hours packing everything, but upon arrival at his new place, he queried, "Why did you bring all of this?" We exchanged puzzled glances. My sister-in-law then entered, scrutinizing the items and creating piles for us to return. My exasperated mother ended up taking some items back to the car. After this incident and the move, we scarcely heard from my brother. We decided to give him space as he adjusted to this new stage in his life. Skipping over less significant events that occurred in the meantime, it was my turn to graduate from college. This event marked the beginning of the first episode of silent treatment from them. How did this happen, you ask? I received only 5 tickets for my graduation ceremony, and naturally, I intended to allocate 2 to my parents, who had supported me, 1 to my grandmother, 1 to my brother, and the last ticket I thought to give to my sister-in-law. However, given our lack of communication, I assumed she might not want to attend and did not see it as significant since she had not contributed to my accomplishments. My best friend, however, had been a constant source of support, studying with me and cheering me on throughout the process. Nevertheless, I decided to extend the invitation to my sister-in-law simply because my brother was to be invited. When I visited home one weekend, they were having dinner at my parents' house. As my sister-in-law was leaving, I quietly inquired if it would be the right time to invite her to my graduation. My mother advised me, "Do what you want, sweetie, it is your decision." Subsequently, I asked my sister-in-law if she and my brother would like to attend. She gave me an odd look and asked for the date in an unusual manner. Upon learning the date, she responded that she could probably make it, rushing out with my brother right behind her. A few months later, my parents and I discovered that they had moved back in with my sister-in-law's parents. This was startling because they had been living there for some time without informing us. My brother uttered words he would typically never use toward our parents, expressing, "We thought you would judge us." In actuality, my parents were understanding about their financial situation, but they were outraged by the thought that my brother was not residing where he had claimed. My graduation announcement was sent to their apartment, but when it was returned, they lied to me, stating that their mail system was disorganized. Regardless, I graduated and began preparing for my move to a different state for graduate school when they unexpectedly messaged my mother, requesting to talk. I distinctly remember it being a random evening last summer when they confronted us, starting to accuse every individual of wrongdoing. First, they targeted my father, claiming he despised my sister-in-law and would never accept her into the family, which was a total falsehood. My father had spoken in defense of me during an emotional moment, and they also criticized him for being too judgmental about their living arrangements, even though he had said nothing. Next, They directed their blame toward my mother for allegedly encouraging the notion that I wouldn't invite my sister-in-law to my graduation. At this point, I felt my anger swelling. I had indeed invited her, and her interpretation of it was incorrect. My sister-in-law began to berate my mother about how she was in the wrong. Then they both turned toward me. She reiterated the graduation invitation, asserting, "Even if I didn't want to go, my family still attends," implying her family was superior. This is not a competition. I digress. The conversation pivoted to my sister-in-law's irritation with my persistent attempts to spend time with my brother alone. My brother chimed in, asserting that they were now a pair and needed to be included together. I acquiesced, stating it was fine, but I also wanted to have moments just with him. My sister-in-law reacted poorly, which was not encouraging. They left in a more amiable state after having pointed fingers at us. The events took a bizarre turn shortly after this meeting. During a family dinner right after that awkward encounter, my sister-in-law and brother brought in a bag for Father's Day. They also presented a gift for my mother, which I initially mistook for a belated Mother's Day gift since they had not purchased anything earlier. Inside, they announced they were expecting a baby. We were at a loss for words. Although we were thrilled, we were also taken aback. After congratulating them with hugs, I retreated to my room. Clearly, they had not communicated with us for months because of their anger, yet they chose to confront us and make amends simply because of the impending baby. We were totally unaware they were upset initially. We had simply grown accustomed to the lack of contact due to my sister-in-law's control over my brother. Fast forward to the fall, it seems everything was somewhat back to normal. As the baby shower approached, I felt anxious because I needed to inform them that I would be unable to attend due to my classes. Thankfully, it didn't seem to matter, although that realization is somewhat disheartening. My parents had a wedding they had already committed to, but drove down the following day for their first grandchild's baby shower, which excited them greatly. My sister-in-law reserved a wedding venue for the shower, managing to secure a discount through connections, although it was still costly. Once again, my parents kindly provided financial support for the baby shower. My mother asked if she could extend invitations, but my sister-in-law imposed a limit. My mother invited around 30 people, but my sister-in-law invited over 75. My parents attended but expressed relief that I hadn't come, as they stated I would have likely been pushed to the background, just like at the wedding. My parents socialized with some of the few invitees who did show up, but this was still inadequate for my sister-in-law and brother. During the gift opening, my brother felt overlooked as he struggled to gain their attention, although it seemed he didn't exert much effort to achieve that. My parents were situated far back in the room, and it is reasonable to expect that grandparents belong closer to the front. Following the baby shower, my mother called to ask if my brother had received the extra cash she had included in the card. My brother confirmed he had received the check, yet he awkwardly inquired if my mother would be willing to spend an additional $500 on a car seat on top of what they had already given. Let that sink in. Why on earth does he require a premium car seat and a designer diaper bag? I suspect this is my sister-in-law's influence. Now I will catch up to the story in the title. Around Thanksgiving, while visiting me, my parents received a phone call from my sister-in-law and brother, asking if they could stay at my parents' home for the weekend. My parents, being their kind-hearted selves, consented, even though they wouldn't be home. Interestingly, my sister-in-law's dog bit her brother's newborn, triggering a significant dispute with her parents. Consequently, they packed up their belongings and moved in with my parents, living there until Christmas. During their stay, my mother took on the responsibility of doing dishes, caring for their dog, and managing numerous chores while also working. My mother requested simple favors, such as assistance with picking up her car from the repair shop, but my sister-in-law consistently prioritized her weekly lunch with her brother and another sister-in-law. Despite being angry with her parents, she visited her own family during the day while my parents and brother were at work. When discussing financial matters with my brother, my father agreed to assist him with a down payment for a home, and my brother readily accepted the offer. The day I returned home for Christmas, my brother and sister-in-law signed paperwork for a house and moved out immediately after my arrival. Do you think we heard from them after Christmas? Not really. Although my parents attempted to mend the relationship by supporting their home purchase, we were back to square one. I had already given up on my relationship with my brother, but I still hoped for an improvement for my parents' sake. Now they have a house, and the baby is due this month. However, another phase of silent treatment has begun. My parents have been accused of being overly controlling and have supposedly instilled anxiety in my brother regarding their judgment of him. My brother is now in therapy, but it appears he only discusses how my father expects too much from him and how his father dislikes his wife. I can only imagine what he might be saying about my mother and me. I reached out to him this week after hearing about his lack of communication with my parents. I tried to understand his perspective, but he accused them of things they have never said and would never say. He even brought up the Halloween Horror Nights incident again, asserting that my father was terrible to my sister-in-law, claiming they still hold resentment over it. It appears he has lost sight of who our parents truly are and that my sister-in-law is feeding him false narratives. I feel as if I am speaking to a different person altogether. I confronted him about his assertions, expressing my anger over how he could say such things after our parents have provided us with a loving home and consistently supported us through their own hardships. It feels as if he has forgotten that our parents have always been loving and kind individuals willing to make sacrifices for us. I did not say anything derogatory about his wife, but simply addressed his baffling behavior. Following that conversation, my sister-in-law blocked me on Instagram for no apparent reason. I sense a deeper issue of manipulation at play, and it seems she would prefer that our family is entirely cut from his life. I long to meet my nephew and for my parents to be great-grandparents, but the tension is ever present. We feel as though we are walking on eggshells. Am I in the wrong for confronting him after everything that has transpired? Story 2. I modernized my family's restaurant, then dealt with a rude woman claiming a VIP table. She ended up with a $4,232 bill. This all took place around Christmas and New Year's, but I recently discovered this subreddit and am now captivated by it, so I feel compelled to share my story. My grandparents emigrated to Canada from Italy in the 1970s and established a restaurant. After their passing, the restaurant was passed down to my parents, who gradually expanded it over the decades. I began working at the restaurant when I turned 15. As time went by, my parents aged and ultimately retired, becoming snowbirds, who migrate to Florida in the winter. A few years ago, they transferred ownership of the restaurant to me while still retaining a small percentage of ownership as an additional revenue source alongside their savings and annuities. As soon as I took over, I modernized the establishment. I renovated the restaurant, rebranded the logo, contacted local and national publications for advertisements, and invited food critics, bloggers, and vloggers. Initially, the response was slow, leading me to worry that the loan I had taken out to transform the restaurant was my greatest blunder, and that I had jeopardized 3 generations of my family's business. However, things eventually began to take off. A somewhat famous local YouTuber featured us in one of his videos, which sparked an influx of customers and reviews. Eventually, we experienced 5 to 10 times our usual business, even on Mondays. The restaurant became a popular venue for major events, and it was not uncommon for a celebrity to visit. On those occasions, I arranged for renowned chefs to come and prepare meals for our guests, which was quite costly. During the holiday season, we were extraordinarily busy. It reached a point where patrons would need to make reservations as early as July to secure a table for December, a process that took years to achieve. When things get hectic, I do not retreat to the back office. I actively work on the floor, addressing whatever needs to be done. This might involve greeting guests, clearing tables, or mopping floors. On nights with high-profile guests or events, I wear a blazer and take charge. One evening, a group of 6 women entered. 5 appeared to be in their early 20s, while the leader of the group seemed to be in her mid-20s, likely either the older sister of one of the other girls or possibly an older sorority sister to incoming college freshmen. As I greeted them at the door, the assertive one, Queen Bee Karen, was telling the younger women how fantastic our restaurant was, highlighting the excellent food and the likelihood of encountering celebrities. When she reached me, she requested a table for 6. I responded, "Of course, may I have the name for the reservation?" She looked at me and replied, "Oh, I didn't make one, but that's fine. The owner is a personal friend of mine and keeps tables open for special guests. We can have one of those tonight. While this practice is indeed true for many high-end restaurants, and I had done the same recently, I had no idea who she was, and she certainly had not discussed any of this with me. I realized she was trying to bypass the reservation system, but she had chosen the worst person to approach with this scheme. I told her, "I am sorry, but we cannot seat anyone without a reservation. As you can see, we do not have any available seats." I refrained from stating that I was the owner and that we had never spoken, so I had not made her any promises, as I did not wish to embarrass her in front of her friends, at least not at that moment. She then loudly told one of the other girls to take a picture of me, claiming she would speak to the owner and ensure I was either cleaning toilets or fired by week's end. The other girls, following her lead, chimed in with comments like, "Yeah, say goodbye to your minimum wage job." I was uncertain if they were genuinely in on her plan or if they mistakenly believed she was connected to the owner. Queen Bee Karen continued to assert, "You can just give us a table, or I can make your life very difficult. This is not worth you losing your job," persistently pointing and trying to belittle me, implying that I was obviously insignificant because if I were important, I would know who she was, and I should address her with nothing but agreement. After a long day, I saw 3 possible courses of action. 1. Confront her and state that I was the owner, exposing her game. 2. Simply give her the table and end the matter. Or 3. Teach Queen Bee Karen and her entourage a lesson. I opted for the third choice for various reasons, including my own flaws, but I like to think my desire to teach her a lesson was at least half of my motivation. I smiled at her and said, "Of course, ma'am, please follow me." And I seated her at one of the 3 tables we keep available for special guests, which occasionally includes celebrities. I offered my apologies for the situation and agreed that it would have been simpler to just give her the table, also informing her that the first 3 rounds of drinks would be complimentary. I seated them and served them personally. As they were settling in, I mentioned that we would need one of their credit cards and IDs for our records, which I would return before they left. Queen Karen handed me her cards, announcing to her friends that the night would be on her. I took their orders and brought them their complimentary drinks, while noting that, due to our high volume of business that evening, there might be a delay with the food. The girls were primarily focused on their free drinks. They ordered 3 rounds and still had not received any food. Eventually, they called on me to check on their orders, maintaining a rude attitude throughout. I assured them I would check, while asking if they would like any additional drinks. They ordered 2 more rounds just as the appetizers arrived. At this point, they were all quite intoxicated, having spent the majority of the night drinking on empty stomachs, only having eaten salads thus far. As more food came out, they continued to order more drinks. What these girls failed to realize was that they were seated at our VIP table, which costs a few thousand just to reserve, although I did not charge them for that. But I did charge them for the outrageously expensive cocktails they consumed throughout the night, minus the first 3 complimentary rounds. Additionally, as mentioned, the menu at the VIP table is different. It does not display prices, a trade secret, and it includes higher-end items such as white truffles, black caviar dishes, and specially imported West Coast oysters, among others. At one point during the evening, I started to reconsider my approach, worried I might be going too far with these girls who might not understand the implications. However, I was reassured by their comments throughout the night. For instance, one of the younger girls asked if I felt like my life was worthless now that I was merely a waiter. Another employee reported that they were scheming on how to mess with me, to ensure I would always give them a table in the future. I also overheard comments like, "He's cute, but I would never date a waiter like that, he is such a pushover." There were numerous comments of this nature throughout the night, so I persevered with their lesson. By the night's end, each girl's bill totaled approximately $500 to $600. When I handed Queen Karen the total amount of $4,232.23, including tax and tip, I had never seen. She went from laughing and socializing with her friends to nearly in tears. She called me over and asked if this was a joke. I took the bill, looked it over, and stated, "Oh yes, I apologize. I will get you the correct bill in a moment." She felt a wave of relief, believing she had received someone else's bill, called me a fool, and turned back to her friends. To be fair, I did make an oversight by forgetting to account for her 8th order of a dozen oysters, which cost about $120. So I went back and added it to the total. When I returned to provide her with the correct bill, she erupted again, causing a ruckus. I simply asked if there was anything on the bill that she had not ordered. In shock, she and her friends examined the bill line by line, including the initial few lines indicating their 3 rounds marked complimentary. They took out their phones and meticulously checked each item for the 100th time, adding everything up. Clearly unsettled, Queen Bee Karen announced she needed to use the restroom. Part of me thought she might attempt to pull a dine and dash, leaving her friends behind with the bill. But I subtly reminded her that we had her ID and credit card without overtly indicating that I expected her to run off. 10 minutes later, she returned with fresh makeup, obviously indicating she had been crying, and concocted a story about how terrible the food had been and how awful the drinks were, claiming that, at the very least, I should have the bill, with her friends chipping in, despite having initially insisted that the night would be on her. As if a light bulb had gone off, she once again mentioned her friendship with the owner, attempting to leverage that connection to pressure me into reducing the bill. Suppressing a grin at this stage, I firmly told her no. Just no, I cannot change the bill. She then pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages from someone named, my restaurant's name owner. I quickly realized she had likely altered the contact name and deleted previous conversations to fabricate this story. I read the texts and clicked into the contact, informing her that this was not the owner's cell number. She retorted that he had multiple phones for business and that I obviously wouldn't know all his numbers. I was stunned. This girl had thought of everything, except for the fact that I was the actual owner. I proposed, "How about this if we call him and he authorizes a 50% discount, then I will agree." Her response was a scream, prompting the few remaining customers to stare in our direction. It became clear that I needed to conclude this matter. I stated, in a less accommodating tone, "Cut the nonsense. You don't know the owner, you've never been here before, and if you keep shouting, I will call the police." Her demeanor shifted, and she attempted to defend herself. I countered her weak arguments by asserting, "My grandparents founded this restaurant. My family has operated this place for generations. I have worked here nearly my entire life. I am the sole owner, and I have never seen you or heard of you, nor have I ever made any promises to a stranger I do not know or have never met before tonight." The younger followers of Queen Karen were stunned, unsure how to respond. The leader was in tears. I concluded, "I gave you the table you wanted, one of the special reserved tables for high-end clients, which I did not charge you for, and I also provided you with 3 complimentary drinks. If you refuse to settle the bill, I will call the authorities and hand them your ID." In tears, Queen Karen signed the bill, and her friends rummaged through their purses to contribute whatever cash they could, totaling perhaps a few hundred, with a promise to reimburse her later. 2 days later, a man strode into my restaurant, visibly angry, and demanded to speak with me. I was in the back office, so he waited about half an hour. He was Queen Bee Karen's father. She accompanied him, keeping her head down. I escorted them both to my office, where I showcased highlights from our security camera footage, which captured excellent audio since it recorded in the VIP area, where we maintain detailed records due to unrelated previous incidents. After reviewing the footage, he stormed out with her, berating her the whole time they left. I have neither seen nor heard from them since, but the original bill I presented to them, which did not include the $120 oysters, is now framed on my desk. As a side note, I did not incur as much overhead for the table and the 3 drinks as one might assume. The table was initially meant to remain empty, so I lost nothing since I had not anticipated any gain to begin with. The cost for the food and other drinks more than compensated for the loss of the first 3 complimentary rounds. I contemplated posting this story in the Nuclear Revenge subreddit, but after reading some of the accounts there, I felt that making this girl pay several $1,000s and imparting a valuable life lesson to her did not quite hold the same weight as the extreme revenge or significant losses found in those stories. I have received numerous direct messages from some very upset individuals, but yes, there are previous posts in my history about a job at a bank. Last year, My ex's brother fell on hard times and lived with us for a few months. He is also a Reddit user, and he posted while using my computer, which I did not and do not mind. Whether you choose to believe this story or not, here it is, and I hope you enjoy it as I step away from the mic.